I actually worked for the predecessor of Thames Water 42 years ago. It was called the Greater London Council, the Department of Public Health Engineering, and one of my jobs was to go inside the sewers in London and survey them because we didn't know where they were at the time, and then design renovation systems. The Greater London Council then supported me to do a sandwich degree. So I have a great love of the Greater London Council. Not quite so much love for Thames Water, but I have worked on the Tideway Tunnel. I worked on the sediment transport issues in the tunnel using computational fluid dynamics. And I wrote a report on the possibility of using SUDS on the Tideway Tunnel catchment. It's Appendix E in the 2010 report. However, our brief was not to consider infiltration and not to consider any of the things I'm going to talk about today. So, not surprisingly, SUDS came out as being too expensive and not good on return. But we shall see. I'm not going to get into a bun fight with Phil here, because that's not what we're about, and indeed I suggested that you invited him. I'm just going to present you with some evidence from some ongoing projects that actually might make you think that the tunnel's based on a false premise. And indeed, the chairman of the steering group who formulated the tunnel has now changed his mind about the best option. He doesn't believe it's necessary. So, we are beset around by problems, and Phil talked a lot about solutions. Engineers love problems. I was having a conversation with somebody the other day, and they said, "You're an engineer, why didn't you talk about solving the problems?" More of that later. London actually has less rainfall per year than Melbourne. You may not believe that, but it's true. And London does, as the southeast of England, has a major water shortage problem in such that Thames Water have been building desalination plants. It's a major issue. We also have these other problems, not just the problems of the politicians we've got in number 10 Downing Street, in the bottom left there, but we get flooding every year. And the bottom left there is another one of Phil's annihilation objectives. It's one of the combined overflows into the Thames. But pollution from overflows and from other sources is an issue, and obviously the impact on the ecosystem. I'll just point out that what comes out of a combined sewer overflow is not sewage. It's mostly stormwater mixed with a small amount of sewage, but that's another issue. And then we have too many people. It depends how you define that, but we have lots of people, and we're going to have even more people, and several speakers have talked about that. And then how do we deal with our mega cities? And indeed, in my Dutch group, we're dealing with things that are not mega cities because we feel they've been left out a bit. With the Asian Development Bank, we're looking on at some of the smaller cities around the world, and then, of course, climate change. How do we deal with this? Well, the false premise is that all of this is a problem. None of it's a problem. It's all an opportunity. And the problem is that this world has been run by engineers. The urban drainage world, and I'm going from here to give a keynote at the British Urban Drainage Conference, so I've got to leave at 3 o'clock. And there I'll be talking about the engineer mentality. We've been stuck with the engineer mentality for more than 100 years. We have to solve the problem. And the problem is separate from everything else that goes on in our urban area. This morning we had several architects speaking, which was brilliant. But architects are not immune themselves from not taking water seriously. And we need to bring our professions better together. And certainly in the UK, the planning profession is lagging behind on this stuff a bit. And one of our biggest challenges in the projects we've been doing is get departments within municipalities to work effectively together, let alone different organisations to work effectively together. And it's still, I work with Ellen on Dordrecht, there is a shining beacon of how it can be done. But she'll tell you the municipalities in England are a mess. So can't we do this better? And we heard, unfortunately, this morning that the EU definition of a smart city doesn't include water. It's tragic. And some of these images, the top right, are the new Milan tower blocks. You know, it actually looks like a place that you might like to live. The bottom, of course, is the Netherlands, where we would all like to live. But it's happening everywhere. Seoul, you can see how the river has been restored. Freiburg in Germany has always had nice water in the cities, in the streets. And the Netherlands, really nice water being utilised in urban areas. In New York, and I was sorry we didn't get the presentation this morning. I'm sure many of you have been to the High Line in New York, which is to create an urban garden on what was a transport elevated area. It's becoming one of the great wonders of the world. But livability, New York has a 1 million street trees program. They're retrofitting 1 million street trees. So the idea about making urban areas better places to live, we have to make sure that water figures appropriately in this. And this image here doesn't have anything to do with water, and that's why I've shown it. It does have community gardens, and in London, our mayor, Boris Johnson, has actually forgotten that he actually needs water, because he wants London to be the greenest city in Europe. Where's the water going to come from? Out of Thames Water's taps. Really good. What has water to do with livability? Well, if you're interested in more of these ideas, you can contact me later, because I've got papers and reports on this stuff. So I've just picked out one example of each. There's, according to Hand to Hand, who works in Melbourne, more of that later, there are 3 human needs: existence, relatedness, and growth. And an example of the existence one is physical and material needs. We need potable water, a safe and secure supply. What could be quite secure is harvesting at source. Collect it yourself. In my garden, I have 3 different types of rainwater collection system. Relatedness, social interaction, interpersonal relationships, builds social cohesion, and safe and secure places of people and nature to interact. We saw that with the proposals for the New York development. But local stormwater management by local people. Ellen was talking about that. Growth. You need societal self-esteem and actualisation, control independence, choice and influence on decisions about water. The Water Framework Directive in Europe supposedly embeds the public into this. My son's going to have to pay £100 extra a year for this tunnel. He wasn't consulted. He lives in Reading, which is quite away from London. He was never engaged in this process. That's a 30% increase on his water charges per year, forever, for a tunnel that's not needed. These, of course, are very nice, but what about the important stuff? We've got all this nice horticulture stuff. What about the real issues? Well, I'm working on this big Australian program, the CRC for Water Sensitive Cities, 120 million Australian dollars. Half of it is from industry, half of it is from Australian government. And this was a slide that they developed probably 5 years ago now. And what it shows is that urban runoff for the Melbourne metropolitan area actually, after urbanisation, has some 463 gigalitres per year excess compared with the pre-development. And the water demand in Melbourne is 435 gigalitres per year. So the idea was, surely we can join these together. Urban runoff is a resource. It's an opportunity. And you're treating it and dealing with it at source. You're not treating it at some downstream point. So it helps deal with floods and also with pollution, and I'm sure you can all think about how you can do that. can take water out at source. You may need some sort of treatment, depends what you want to use it for. A lot of that treatment can be green-blue infrastructure, but it also helps with storage and flood protection. Yes, there is grey infrastructure in there, of course there is, and we need a mixture. The lady at the front here was dead right. We need a mixture. So it can deliver many and multiple benefits by managing the water at source. Here, flooding, you can have warthogs in your street if you want in Gothenburg, by restoring the ecosystem and looking at the ecosystem services. And we now understand a lot more about ecosystem services since the Millennium Ecosystems Assessment, which every developed country and some developing countries were involved in. So what about doing it for real? And the pipe-bound concept actually originated in a Swedish report. I won't name it. It was from a municipality. And I was drawn attention to it by my PhD student at Luleå, Annika Setner, who defended her PhD a couple of years ago. If you're tackling single problem solutions, you're not going to get the best values to society. Lots of people now believe that Adam Smith only wrote a book called The Wealth of Nations. He didn't. Before that, he wrote a book on equity and justice. And that was about doing the best for society. More recently, Amartya Sen has written a book on justice. And these are all about making decisions under complex, wicked problems. And how do we deliver the best societal benefits? Overall, the most sustainable. I've got that word in there. I've got a book for sustainability. I've got an award for sustainability for the International Water Association. But I've given up on it because I have no idea what it is. And neither does Per Arne, and we've agreed on that. Politicians have devalued the word so much. And indeed, our National Planning Policy Framework in England says that development that's self-evidently sustainable should go ahead without delay. All of the best academic minds in the world don't know what that means. I don't know how Eric Pickles knows, but he must do, because it's in a government policy statement. That's for England. Scotland and Wales are different. There's no longer any option. We can only afford multifunctional infrastructure. It has to do as many jobs as possible. But to get there, we have to change our governance institutions and our regulations. Often it's our regulations that are the problem and the way that our institutions are set up. In England, we have a Water Act just passed this year that are going to make even more competition in our water system. Everyone in this room knows that we need to integrate our water systems. We have to manage them in an integrated way as a system. This is not going to happen in England. It's going to go the other way. And then the behaviours and attitudes, especially on the part of professionals. Lots and lots of people involved. So how do we get best values to society? I bet everyone sitting here is thinking, you know, there are so many people involved. How do we do it? Ellen's the only one in the room who's managed to do it. And they're doing it in Philadelphia. Of course, Philadelphia is far too dense. You can see that picture there in the middle. Well, they're doing it. And they're actually winning awards for this. But they had to rewrite the ordinances for stormwater for the city. And they had to convince the people in the city. But they've got a mayor called Nutter, who actually thinks this is wonderful. And the value of doing this accrues to the city as a whole, because the mayor's responsible for all city services. In London, our mayor, who's also a nutter, but his name's Boris Johnson, he's only responsible for some things. The local municipalities are responsible for other things, and a lot of the water is the responsibility of Thames Water. So it's what you would call a dog's breakfast. And the Centre for Neighbourhood Technology in Chicago analysed the benefits that were going to accrue to Philadelphia from taking a 50% green infrastructure approach, so they're still going to have a tunnel, but it's going to be half the size. So, for example, social costs avoided by green-collar jobs. And that's $100 million over the lifetime. Phil mentioned 9,500 jobs while the tunnel's being built. Well, these green jobs actually go on forever. And the overall total added value is $2.8 billion, compared with $180 million they'd have got from their tunnel. And this is underway. It's well underway. A company called CDM Smith, and this information has come from a guy called Mike Mamone, are doing it. And the US EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, keeping their eyes on all this stuff. And we probably don't have time to go through this text, but there's a number of examples and case studies there. There are examples of case studies in Australia demonstrating that if you take a whole life perspective, it actually is better value for money. In Wales it's different. Their private water company is no longer private. They've given themselves back to the people of Wales. They've changed government. They've changed the environmental regulator. So they're actually doing it. It's being done in Utrecht. And it's been done even in London, in a place called Maysbrook Park, where they've used ecosystem services to demonstrate that the benefit-to-cost ratio of doing this stuff is 7-to-1. 93% of those benefits were found from cultural services, city-deprived area London. Our government listened to that. I did say to Phil I'd introduce Counters Creek, so this is the backs of some of the houses in Counters Creek where Thames are doing pilot studies on retrofitting. You can see quite difficult to get rid of your surface water there, but it actually can be done. And sadly, we seem to need to monetize everything, so we've got some new tools developing where we are monetizing. We're getting away from the pipe-bound solutions deal with a single issue in order to look at a much added value. And we need interacting infrastructure in systems of systems. And these are the categories of the benefits that we're looking at that we're now monetizing for our green-blue infrastructure benefit tool, which will be available at the end of this year. Incidentally, Thames Water are contributing the funding of this project. So we've got a range of issues there. And then finally, and somebody asked me the other day, is this an image or is it real? This is real. This is a roundabout in Illinois. It's a multifunctional public space. It's a roundabout, collects runoff from surrounding streets to alleviate downstream flooding, infiltrates, stores, purifies, provides reuse water, some which is used for cooling the area and the space, abates surrounding vehicle noise, and provides a recreational facility hosting rock and blues festivals. What can you want from a piece of infrastructure? Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Food for thought and provocative, of course, as usual.
No, not as provocative as usual, Pirani. Come on.
You can be worse.
I can be worse. Yeah.
Maybe we can should give Phil a possibility to comment on this. You want to, Ellie, or you? No. Sure. Maybe tunnel half the size would do the trick.
Phil Stride, I think you recognise me. I mean, a lot of what Richard says, I totally agree with. I think there's a massive amount of agreement, and certainly the holistic approach of looking at how water is managed and the water cycle is managed. And in terms of my experience around the world with talking to other people managing the same problem, I do admire how the Americans, and I don't know about all the European countries, but how the Americans have a more holistic view about how you manage the water cycle in general, and a lot of power is given to the city in terms of how that's managed. And that's not the case in the UK, as Richard says, and certainly it's like asking the question of asking directions somewhere, and someone says, well, if I was you, I wouldn't start
That's
here.
exactly right.
It certainly doesn't necessarily help you, and we have to
right.
we have to confront the issues we've got. And I
Yeah.
would be interested in Richard's views about how perhaps we get a more holistic approach to water in the UK and indeed in other European countries. In terms of the Thames Tideway Tunnel, you can obviously don't need me to tell you that we don't see eye to eye about it, and obviously we have a difference of opinion. In terms of the cost of it, we have quoted to our customers it would be £70 to £80 per year maximum, which we hope to significantly reduce, and the average water bill currently is £350. So I do agree it is material, and I absolutely agree that sustainable drainage and a single tunnel solution aren't mutually exclusive, as we were saying.
In
The lady
combination.
from Copenhagen. So I think we do agree. I think the problem we've got in London is, as I was trying to articulate, is the scale of the problem, and whether, how many years it would take if we went down the sustainability or sustainable drainage solutions route, which we believe will be 30 or 40 years, to put that in place without grinding London to a halt in terms of traffic disruption. So I think there's a lot of commonality, but obviously there are points on which we don't completely see eye to eye. Anyway, thank you for the opportunity to respond.
I don't think we can solve this here, but it's
No.
it's very nice to hear the two sides.
Well,
I think
if I can just comment.
Please.
Firstly, what Mark Mamone said to me about Philadelphia was, the first bit of green infrastructure you build helps to deal with your problem. When's the tunnel going to be finished, Phil? 2023. So 9 years, allow buggeration factors 2040.
No, we're hoping to do it quicker than that.
Well, I know you are, yeah. But and your bit about starting from here is exactly my point. And I'll just tell you what I wrote in the conclusion to my report. It wasn't for Phil, it was someone else who was running it at the time. But I said that Thames Water are doing what they can do, what they are supposed to do. It's not Thames Water that I have issue with. The terms of their license mean this is what they should do. Green infrastructure solution means that dealing with surface water passes to the property owner in London, as some to municipalities if it's on public land. So it's our structure, our institutional framework that fails to provide the incentive to do it. Who I do have issue with is our Environment Agency, who is a public body, who have actually used computational models, some of which I developed when I was a real engineer, that I know don't work properly. And the results of those models have been used to define the standards that need to be built to. And I've consistently asked them to link the uncertainty of the models with the cost benefit. That information has never been provided. And I've asked them informal government questions as well as informally. To me, this is another example of having an environmental lobby who's not actually really understanding the sustainability issue, which is they're simply cleaning up some of the river, which could be done in another way. It may take a bit longer. And they're transferring the problem into embodied carbon, into air emissions, and into technologically locked-in options. The pumping, Phil, remind me, is it 150 million kilowatt hours a year to empty the tunnel?
It's, the figure I remember is it's £300,000 to empty the tunnel because it only fills periodically on the
Yeah, but that's money, that's not energy.
No,
Yeah, it was a figure, unless it was 15 million kilowatt hours, it's 15 or 150 million. It's a lot of energy. And yeah, you're going to generate a lot from your solar and so on, but that's a lot of carbon.
So maybe we stop there. We are running out of time, but one final question, Richard. What would be your advice to Marianne in Malmö regarding the Malmö tunnel?
Malmö Peter Starr left you with a fantastic legacy. Can you not see how that legacy can be extended? Your harbour area is great. Your community engagement is world leading in Malmo. Is it really necessary to have a tunnel? Yes, it might cost you more to do it differently now, but can I suggest, and you might like this suggestion, that you go across and visit the US EPA, Centre for Neighbourhood Technology, and talk to them about what they're doing. We're going to hear from Seattle
Right now.
and people shortly, so you should get some insights from there. But I think you need a trip to the US.
Thank you, Richard.